I opened up the link. I didn't realize I hadn't opened it up so everybody could see into it.
What's the website again? I'm sorry.
KimbraSwain.com.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, no, I don't. I can project. I just didn't know how it carried in this small room. So, all right. And if I get too southern for you, please wave your hand and say, "Can you repeat that in English?" And I will. So, I'm Kimbra Swain. I write urban fantasy. I first published in 2017, and I have over 40 books on Amazon. It was something when I got started, I was like, oh, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be fun. And then it became an addiction, and I haven't stopped since. So that's kind of a little bit about who I am and why you're listening to me today. And Craig needed help, so that's the other reason. And then he was like, oh, you're the first one right after the first. I was like, oh my goodness, really? So I blessed his heart and moved along. On the outline, you'll see a link tree that takes you to all of my links and everything, so you can kind of see who I am, what I do. And also, I have a group on Facebook where I help authors and aspiring authors. And I just put things that I find that are cool or interesting, or if I come across a new piece of software or something that I recommend that I really like, I always place it on there. So if you want to join, it's completely, no pressure. We've talked a little bit about Nano this month, and I'm way behind on Nano because I'm here, and that always happens. But so it's just interactive. It's very laid back. It's not crazy, obnoxious, all the time posting 20 books. So if you want to join it, feel free. I'll let anybody in.
What's the name?
It's called Kimbra Swain's Authors and Aspiring Authors, I believe. But it's on the link tree. If you follow the link tree through the outline from my website, it's on there, so it'll take you straight to it. So we're going to talk about urban fantasy characters today and how important characters are to building your story. And it is my personal opinion that characters are more important than your plot. It's more important than the world you build, and they're the things that connect you to your reader. And so a lot about what I'm talking about today is not just about how to build that character, but how to build that character so that it is a marketing tool for you to use to gain readers and to keep readers. So I sent out a survey on the 20Books Vegas site to urban fantasy authors, just asking them about their process and give you some of the results of that survey. They gave me various definitions of urban fantasy, and I think, for most of us, it is magic in a modern world. And whether that world is urban or rural or how that fits into the world, it is at the very basic magic in a modern world. And I liked what B.R. Kingsolver put. His quote was, "Once upon a time, right around the corner." And I think that works. I mean, because you're talking about the current time, the modern point, and it's something that could happen anywhere. So once upon a time gives you the fantasy element, and then right around the corner gives you, hey, this could happen anywhere. So I think this is a really good definition of urban fantasy. I really liked it. And just to give you some of the results, 73% of people filled out are KU authors. So they published through Kindle Unlimited. 27% were Y. When I asked them if they plotted, pantsed, or did a combo, 22 plot, 32 pantsed, and 46 did the combo of both. When I asked them if they created their main character first or their world first, they said 73% said they create their main character first, and 27% said their world first. And I think also I take a lot from Amelia Hutchins, who writes paranormal romance, and I really like what she says she does. She writes incident reports. So her characters go and do things, and she writes up the reports about it. And that's kind of how I feel. I feel like they're doing stuff, and I'm just, reporting on it so that my readers can find out what's going on with those characters. So I really like how she phrases that. When I asked them about if they write character-driven or if they write plot-driven, 70.3% said character-driven, and 29.7% said plot-driven. So, what's the difference between character-driven and plot-driven? Character-driven is an internal conflict for your character. How they develop from one point internally to how they develop to another point internally. That's their character arc, their conflict, and their basis of the story. If you do plot-based, it's an external conflict. What they're facing on the outside, is how their story progresses, not so much how the outside affects the internal conflict. So it gives you a little bit of a, kind of to be able to tell the difference between the two. So I think there's a few key elements to our urban fantasy main character. And honestly, characters, as you know, can run the gamut. They can be anything, anywhere, anytime. But I think when you're doing urban fantasy, I think you really have to make sure that these things are in place. Yeah, their character has to have a foot in both worlds. Whether they discover it at the beginning of your story, in the middle of your story, if they're already completely involved, they are the glue between the human reality and the fantasy reality. So your character is very important in conveying how those two worlds interact. So that's the first one I think you have to have. I think the character's personality is extremely important. A lot of times you see in urban fantasy, the snark, the sass, the sarcasm is a tool for an urban fantasy character. You don't have to have that, but I do believe they have to have a certain sense of humor, whether they're dry or whether they're obnoxious, whether they get nervous and they start spouting dick jokes. Whatever it is, that person has to have some sense of humor because urban fantasy is dark. And you may get that levity from other characters, but your main character needs to have some sort of personality trait that makes you smile, makes you laugh. And that's just, these are a couple of personal things that I make sure when I build my characters. And then I also think the character's backstory is ultimately important. I think urban fantasy characters always have a little bit of jaded to them. I think their world is, whether they know about magic or not, there's something in their past that makes them unique to the situation. So when you're building your character, whether you start your story at the beginning of their backstory or whether you start it in the middle of their backstory or, however you start it, they need to have that foundation that pushes them through the story. And that rolls me right into the first point that I want to make about making your urban fantasy character marketable. You have to create empathy for your character. So, what is empathy? What about this character makes me care about them? What about them makes me interested in what they're doing? And I had some people answer this question in the survey, and a lot of them says, their struggle makes them interesting. Well, yeah, their struggle is, because the struggle is real. But what about their struggle is interesting? Because we all struggle. That's life. So what is it about this character that makes it unique? What is unique about their struggle? And whether that's the magic involved, the magic they have, the magic they don't have, the conflict that goes on between their relationships or their internal conflict, that empathy has to come from somewhere. It's got to be something more than just, they're just struggling through life. The second thing is, what is their motivation? So this goes back to internal characteristics of your character. So the character has a motivation, and a lot of people answered that question is they're trying to survive, or they're just trying to get by. Okay, that's true, but why? Why do they want to survive? Why do they want to get through? And that's where your motivation comes in. Ask deeper. When I was in manufacturing, I used to build cars for Mercedes. And when we'd have a problem come up, we had to fill out all these forms. Anyway, corporate world. And then you had to ask 5 whys of why something happened. Well, why do we have downtime? Because something broke. Why did it break? Because somebody didn't do maintenance. Why did they do maintenance? Because they had too much to do. Whatever it is, you have to dig deeper. So when you're doing your character, it's good to say, okay, so they're having a struggle, or they're just trying to get by, or they're just trying to make a buck, you know? Why? Why do they need a buck? Why do they want to survive? And I don't know how many people, and this is just an example, it's a modern example. If you watched Squid Game, which is on Netflix, there's a character there who goes through this, you know, Hunger Games type thing to try to win a pot of money. And her motivation is the character that I connected with the most. Her motivation, at first you think she's just a thief, she's just trying to make money, and it comes down to she escaped from North Korea, and her mother's still in North Korea, and she's trying to get the money so that she can get her mother out. And so I really connected with that, because it wasn't just, hey, she was trying to make some money to survive. She was trying to make some money to survive so she can get her mother out of North Korea. So that's what made her character more interesting to me, because the why went beyond, I'm just trying to survive, or I'm trying to make a buck. Next I want to talk about character flaws, which is always fun, because we were all full of flaws. I know I am. So, but there's two things in character flaws. There's human condition flaws and inhuman condition flaws. And what I mean by inhuman is that magical flaw that they might have. Whether they're scared of their magic, or they're unable to control it, or whatever it is. They have human flaws where they're stubborn, or, you know, obnoxious, or they're rude, or whatever the thing is. That's what makes them, you know, that's their flaw. That's the thing that they come back to all the time. Now, when I asked this question in the survey, so I got paragraphs of answers on what their flaw is. But make it really easy on yourself. Look up a character flaw list. There's some on Pinterest. There's places all over the web that you can find them. And find that 1 word or 2 word flaw. Don't make it hard. They're stubborn. You know, they're mean. They don't like people. You know, whatever it is, give them those flaws. Now, once you've decided what their flaws are and the way you develop them, that's how where your plot comes in and influences that character. So, if we say that the character is flawed, their flaws are based on mistaken views about the world or themselves. It's the lie that they believe. So if they believe that I can't control this magic, then that's their flaw, because they're just inept. Ineptness is a flaw. And your character journey is how they go from that flaw to how they overcome it. And so there's 2 ways to resolve flaws. They either overcome it or they learn to use it. So when you have a character flaw and your character needs to develop through a series, if they continue to carry that flaw from one book to another, to another, to another, your reader's going to get bored of it, because this character is not progressing. They're not learning. They're, you know, and sometimes a flaw is so minuscule, like, you know, they, you know, put things in your coffee that you would never put in your coffee. Not talking about those kind of flaws. I'm talking about, you know, the stubbornness, or the inability to see what's going on around them, or, you know, the meanness. Stop being mean and start finding out what's going on with all the monsters around you, you know? That's one of the things, and it's very forefront. I've been listening to Lindsay Buroker's Death Before Dragon series, and Val, the main character, has a very bad reputation in the monster community because she's an assassin. But when she starts to realize that the monsters, some of them need help. They're not all of them out there are bad, and that if she tries to help some of them, that, you know, maybe her outlook on them will change. And throughout the series, it goes from she's hunting them down to she's helping them out. And so it's a huge character arc of how that person changes from one point to the other. And so that whole plot and everything that happens to her is all about her changing her view of the world. And so she either accepts her flaws or she overcomes them, and in that case she overcame them. Another important thing about flaws is your villain. Whatever flaw you give your character, your villain needs to reflect that flaw in some way. How does that flaw match up with your villain? Sometimes they counter each other. Sometimes they're the exact same flaw. And the villain uses it to their advantage, and the character it's a crutch for them. It's the thing that holds them back. And so you see that comparison very lively on the page, and the readers are engaged because they see the difference between how two people who have the same flaw interact. The villain also needs to exploit the flaw of the main character. So when the villain knows that this person is scared of using their magic, they put them in situations where they make them use their magic. And that was one of the things that I was in DragonCon. I was on a panel with some other urban fantasy authors. And then one of the questions from the audience was, how do you build, characters? They've got all these powers and all these things that they can do, and they're so powerful. How do you make the story interesting? And for some reason, when I go down the line, it was my turn to go first. This happens. And it didn't help that 2 seats down from me, Jim Butchert was sitting. And so, I'm already feeling a little bit out of place. But what I said was, you can give your character, for instance, my character, the fairy queen that lives in the trailer park, is a winter fairy queen. She can do anything with ice, water, wind, snow, blizzards, but she can't do a fireball to save her life. So I always put her in the situation where she needs a fireball. Mm-hmm. And so when you build that world and you give your character those flaws, you put them in a situation where they have to use that flaw. Whether the villain exploits it or whether you build the situation and the plot around it, that character is going to have to face that flaw. And you bring it to the front over and over and over again. And when I said that, Jim goes, "Ooh, you're mean." And I said, "Thank you." So, I am mean. I think being mean to your characters is very, very important to their development. Put them in the worst situation possible. It may seem kind of crazy, but do it. Put them in it, and then you can go back and edit it and draw it back and everything. But put them in wild, crazy situations. Sometimes it works. And that develops their character. That makes them more interesting. And so when I will go back to the why is they're struggling with this, and I want to see how they get there, how they get to that point. And it also goes to, if they don't ever get to that point, then the readers walk away because they want to see that development. So your villain uses the flaws. There's also external flaws, and I'll just mention this. I listened to a lot of, when I was asked to do this, I knew what I did, but I didn't know how to tell you guys what I do. And so I listened to several authors online present characters and stuff. One of the best ones I found, and I linked it in the thing, is Brandon Sanderson did a lecture series at BYU, and he does it on a lot of different things, and the character one was very, very, I liked his structure and how he presented it, so that helps me a lot to prepare for what I did today. But one of the things he brought up was you can have external flaws. For example, Spider-Man. Everybody knows Spider-Man, right? Mm-hmm. His external flaw is Aunt May. He can't get rid of Aunt May. He can't resolve Aunt May. Aunt May is his aunt, She's there, but she's going to be always in danger. And you see that a lot in urban fantasy because you have friends and family and people that don't know the magic world's out there, and yet you've got to protect them. And he calls that an external flaw, which I think is kind of interesting. So you can think about not only the internal conflicts and the flaws within, but there's flaws without that you don't have any control over. And those are sometimes the most frustrating for your character, and that makes them more interesting. Okay, so the next thing I need to talk about is your character must fail. If your character wins every fight and beats up every person and sails through, you're going to get that Mary Sue moniker, and you don't want that. One of the things Brandon Sanderson did that I like the way he puts it in, he has a sliding scale for characters. There's 3 characteristics that he goes with: likability, competence, and agency or activity. So the character scale can go up and down on different characters, but one of those has to be in place for them to be likable. They can be a less likable character, but if kind of the people around them like them, it kind of makes you wonder, why did they like them if nobody else, I can't connect to this character, but everybody else around them likes them, so I'm going to keep reading to find out why this character is likable by everybody else. If they're incompetent, take Luke Skywalker. At the beginning, Luke is a moisture farmer, and he talks big about going and flying and fighting the Empire, but he's really incompetent. He has no clue about Force, but he's likable. And so that the likable scale goes up, but the competence scale is down. And then, the last one of agency, of getting out there and being involved, being proactive against whatever's going on. Now, a lot of times something happens to your character and they have to react. And that's fine, and that may be the initial conflict. But your character needs to be proactive. They need to be, okay, I'm in this now, what am I going to do about it? And so they can't just sit back. If they just sit back and let things happen to them, they're not any fun. And when Sanderson talks about this, he talks about Han Solo. In the beginning, Hans doesn't want anything to do with any of it, right? But by the middle of Empire Strikes Back, the doors open in the Cloud City, and Darth Vader's sitting there, and the first thing Han does is pick his gun to shoot. Now, he knows he can't do anything to Darth Vader, right? But from the beginning, when he doesn't want to be involved, to he automatically says, I'm going to fight this. He's progressed from not being active to being active. So you can see in just 2 episodes it'd be like 2 books for you. This character has gotten to the point where they will react immediately. And you need to have that progression when you're building your characters. So, I talked about flaws, and I kind of put this in here because I was talking about physical flaws, external flaws, and personality flaws. And those are just the 3 things that really go up under the flaw things. You can have physical flaws because you have a physical impairment. If I was a wizard, I'd be in trouble because I can't run, I'm a little overweight, and the big bad guy get away because I'd never catch him. But I have to find a way to get over that physical flaw. And so my character would progress from figuring out how to use it or getting over it, which means going to the gym. Or you can have external flaws like I talk about with anime. So my characters in my story have children. And what do you do with kids? And it's rough in an urban fantasy world. That's right, kids! Good timing, buddy. So, you have to come up with a way to protect them. You have to come up with ways to make it interesting or to put them in danger and how they survive it and how it develops their character. And that's another really, really important thing when you're building your worlds is your supporting characters. Your supporting characters should further your character's arc. Yeah, they're there and they have their own little stories and everything that's going on, they interact. But everything that they do with your character should be something that builds into your character's personality, it builds into their flaws, that plays to whatever conflict that they're going through. Okay, so whenever you have side characters, and it's great in urban fantasy, I love the whole ensemble thing, I love writing that myself because each person kind of complements and they help make up for these flaws. But you have to get to the point where they trust each other to do that, right? So when you have all these, sometimes your external conflicts and flaws will come from your own buddies, your allies. So that's one of the things you want to think about with flaws, and then finally personality flaw. And honestly, I'll have them. You get anxious being in a room full of people. Not me, but whatever your character's flaw is, this is part of their personality, and those can vary widely. But think about your own flaws. Build your own self into a character. I've done it 100 times. A lot of times when I write man, I take something out of my husband's character and I build it through them. And I tell him, I said, you're like 15 different characters, honey. he's like, I am multifaceted. So if you see him walking around with me, he's like 6'5", and so we're kind of opposites. But those are some of the things that you really, really got to build into character, and that's what makes your character really important to your readers, and that's what's going to sell more books to you. Because if they're not connected to that character, you can have a fantastic world, you can have amazing action and fight scenes, but if your character's not interesting, you can forget it. You're not going to sell books. And that's what you want to do, right? So when you're building your story, and I think it's very, very important, you don't even have to do character first, but when you do your character, make sure you visit all of those things, their motivation, their flaws, their external conflicts and things like that. So I was talking about a supporting cast, and they need to have a purpose. Don't stick a character, side character in that's just
Pretty.
no reason. Yeah. I mean, you'll have your reader going, why was that person there in the first place? And that takes them away from what your main character's doing. And you don't want to do that. Sorry, take a drink. And so, I asked the people about roles and filling roles. So do you have somebody that's the mentor or the funny guy? And there was a lot of negativity into that. I got a lot of no's, I don't do that. No, we shouldn't fill roles. But why not? People recognize roles. They recognize Obi-Wan Kenobi as the mentor. They recognize Han Solo as the inept goof that makes funny things and his ship's always breaking down. They recognize these things and it helps build the story. So it's okay to use roles. It's okay to make your side characters fit into those things as long as they complement that main character. So don't be resistant of using those roles. Finally, talk about anti-heroes. And this is just really quick anti-hero. Because there's a lot of anti-heroes in urban fantasy, and I'd like to see more anti-heroes. So when I say anti-hero, I think Jack Sparrow, I think Deadpool. Because they're not just straddling the line between, magical and not magical, they're straddling the line between good and bad. And, some of my favorite characters, I was talking to R.L. King yesterday about favorite characters, and one of my favorite characters in the Dresden Files is Marcone. I love him. He's the mob boss, but I love him. I want more of him, And so I like those morally great characters. So when you're building an anti-hero, don't be afraid to make that person a little on the edge. Don't be afraid to take your hero in places that you wouldn't go yourself, because that makes them interesting. It makes people go, man, they shouldn't do that. That's kind of bad. I'm gonna keep reading. It really does. And it kind of plays into, romance authors make a lot of money because they write a lot of good smut. I love it. I read it myself. But it's some of those things that you wouldn't do in your own personal life. But hey, I'm going to love to read about this character who does things that, I'm not going to walk up to somebody and pop them in the head because they did something I didn't like. But it's a hero will. And Jack Sparrow, you think about Jack, he has a, arc. He goes from not caring about anything except for his boat to caring about what's going on in the world around him. And he's still goofy. He's still inept. He's way down low on that, ability scale. But he's interesting. He's one of the most iconic characters that's been created by Disney in a long time, I think. And so don't be afraid to create that character in your stories because people love those characters. And those are the kind of characters that will sell your books. So, and this is not on the list, but there was a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Just basic tips when I'm building a character, some of the stuff I do. Because I'm a merchandiser. I love to make merchandise. I love to sell book merchandise. I love to, do all these things. I sell book boxes, that have all kinds of different things in. One of the ways that you can market your character and merchandise your character is what I call passive merchandising. Passive merchandising is when your character has something that they love. My main character in the Fairy Tales of Trailer Park Queen loves orange soda. And so anytime your readers who have read this goes out and they see orange soda, I get so many pictures posted in my reader group of orange soda. It's like, hey, I seen Grace's favorites. So build those things into your characters. That's part of their quirks and their personality and who they are. I don't use one of the, you can buy, you can download a list and you can fill out their height, their weight, the blah, 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 all this stuff. I don't do that. I do it as I go along. If something comes up, it's important for me to know that or important for my reader to know that. But I don't do that checklist at the beginning. I do that as I go. So I, came along with she needs something that, really helps define, her quirkiness and the things that she just loves orange soda, which is crazy. She's a fairy queen. She cares about orange soda. She loves orange soda. And so I get a lot of that. And you can do that with all of your characters. But don't be as general as they like to drink coffee. Make them drink a certain kind of coffee. I think Orlando Sanchez does a certain kind of coffee, and I can't think of the name of it. Death Wish coffee. And so Death Wish coffee is something his characters drink, and I go in his reader group, and there's people talking about, hey, I got my Death Wish today, I'm drinking my Death Wish. And that brings your readers back to that character over and over and over again because they see that in the store, they see it online. And, you know, Facebook listens to everything you do, so I'm going to get some advertisements for Death Wish here in a minute. But thank you, Facebook, because you're bringing people back to the story. So when you're doing your characters, think about those external things that aren't the big, heavy character building things. Think about the things that makes the character marketable and helps bring your reader back to the character. If they wear a certain kind of jewelry, or they prefer a certain pair of shoes, they're a kids person, Nike person, whatever. Build that into the story so that when your readers see that out in the world, their minds are automatically brought back and they go, oh, did I download the newest book or not? When's it coming out? And it re-engages your character, your story with your readers. So, I also have a Pinterest, and I put the link on there. I use Pinterest a lot with my characters. I like being able to start a board for each book, and then I put the characters in different sections in that, and I find, you know, visual references when I go to build characters so that I have something to kind of compare them to. Whether I pick a model or a famous person or I just pick a stock photo or whatever it is and I save it there so I can always go back to that and have that visual representation when I go to write. So when you're building your characters, that might be something you're interested in, whether you do it on a cork board or whether you want to do it digitally. There's lots of different ways that you can do that and record that as you go. I prefer Pinterest just because it's where I like to put my things. And another thing I hear a lot of people talk about is naming their characters. And that was one of the things I asked in the survey, how do you name your characters? So many different answers. But I'll tell you how I name my characters. In the very beginning, I started to make all my characters' names mean something. You know, I'm looking at the meanings and I want it to mean this. And that was good for a little while, but at some point after, you know, I'm at 45 books, I ran out of meaningful names. And so I have a Pinterest board where I actually I'm a new mom and I'm going to be having a baby, and I pin all of these baby name slides. And they have all these, the boho baby names, or the southern baby names, or, you know, British baby names, Celtic baby names, mythical god baby names. And I put all of those in there and I divide them between masculine, feminine, both. And then I have a section for witches and a couple of other things that are very specific to what I write with urban fantasy. And when I need a name, I click it up, scroll through, boom, okay, your name is Wesley, you know. And it really gives me kind of a place to go to when, because it's honest, sometimes you're just trying to name a side character that's only going to be there in the first scene, but they need a name, and it can be difficult just to pull something out of the top of your head. So if you have something to refer to, it makes it really easy. And so I use that tool every day that I'm writing a story. I'm in my Pinterest pulling up the name list, my baby names. And so just something you might think about. Also in Pinterest, I have a board that's called Writing Tools. And in there I have, you can search for character flaws. And there's different pictures of different kinds of character flaws. And I put that in there. It talks about, there's some of the things that, you know, I use words to use instead of said and things like that. That's just how, and I pin those because I know those are the things that I struggle with. And so you can use that also. Pinterest I think is a really good tool for authors, especially when you're character building. And that's what I use it. That's where I build my characters. And it's like a tool that I can refer to. And then when it comes time close to, publishing the book, I put the link in my reader group. I'm like, hey, you want to see who's coming up in the next book? Look at my Pinterest board. And then I get all these kind of questions. Oh, I see you pinned this, or I see you pinned that. And it gives people, it's that whole using your research to make it marketable and making your character marketable through what you were doing. It gives a visual representation, and the readers love that. So that's really kind of all I have. But I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Go ahead.
I have a successful series going right now, and I start book 13 on Sunday. And I had those things. I had the flaws. I had the things that she needed to work through. But after 13 books,
right,
I've pretty much worked through them.
Okay.
Now the fans are crazy for it. They're always wanting more, and they're actually saying like, never let this end, never let this end.
Right.
I'm thinking, God, what is she going to do now? So that's my question: is after you have 12 books in a series and she's the female main character, and I made her the younger sister of four, it used to be five, one's dead, older Irish brothers. So there's lots of family conflict, there's lots of swearing, there's lots of all kinds of stuff like that. But, she's gotten over her flaws.
Right.
So, what do you do then?
What I do then is, because I've built really good supporting characters, I start a new series with a new character from that series. It carries the story on. My fairy queen went through 15 books. She has a daughter that's a phoenix and a best friend that's a wolf shifter, and I went into 2 different series for the phoenix daughter and the wolf shifter, and both of those series has 5 books now.
I've had a couple of my beta readers and stuff saying, time to wrap this up, move a spin-off, but I didn't really want to spin off, but yeah.
No,
so it's
mine is just a complete continuation of the story. Like, you roll it from one into the other, and you have to have read the first 15 to get into those. And it's just, I renamed it to give it, a new series, so that it separated it from the first main character. There are people, I know, is it Shannon Mayer that has a series where she goes through the first 5 books and it's one character, and then like the next few books it's a different character. I think so. She has a Phoenix series, I think, that does that. Okay. And that's completely fine to do that. I just wanted to do it separate. That gives me, and I also write it in a way that if they pick it up, they're not going to be too far behind. If they start with the Phoenix series or the Wolf series, I give them a kind of introduction to that character in the first couple of chapters, so they kind of know who they are and where they came from. They don't know the whole backstory, but it might make them interested to go back and read the other backstory. So it has a lot to do with your backlist and building your backlist by creating a front list as a front list. And so, but your character, we all change and we develop flaws as we go. So she may have something that comes up that she didn't realize she had or something developed because she got to a certain point in her life and was like, oh crap, this is different and this is something that I'm doing wrong differently. And so it's completely okay to give them a new flaw, something that develops. It would take me a few minutes to think of exactly, where to go, but there's nothing wrong with creating new flaws. As you go along and you progress in your life, you change, and sometimes it's good change and sometimes it's bad change. So she may have gotten to the point where, hey, yes, she's conquered this one thing, but this other thing is just starting to creep up and it's new, and she didn't expect it. So, go ahead.
I want to ask about having more than one main character.
More than one main character?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I have a series I'm working on, and there's a main name, but then there's like 4 others. They're not really side characters. It's some part of their lives too. The story includes their lives also.
Right. Yeah. I really think of my side characters, some of them as main characters. So I get what you're saying. I do have a series where I have 2 main characters and the point of view changes back and forth. And also in that series I have a third point of view, which is from the villain side. So I get to see what the 2 protagonists is doing and the antagonist. So it kind of builds onto it, and I don't overlap when I'm telling those stories. So when you have 2 main characters, they have to each have their own set of flaws. And something interacting between them can be their flaw. And that makes it more interesting. It draws them together. It makes both of the characters interesting. And so when you do that, though, and sometimes when you retell a story from a different perspective, like this is the example that pops in my head. So 50 Shades of Grey, you had the female perspective, and then the author came out and put the male perspective out. And so you get the same story along the same lines, just a different perspective. When you're putting them both in the same book, try not to overlap too much. You can overlap a little bit to kind of get the reader, make sure they realize that, hey, this is going on at the same time and it is in sequence. And you can make references. If you're like with my villain character, they make references to things that happen between the other 2 characters, even though they're not near each other. And so it helps keep the continuity of the line going, but don't try not to overlap too much when you're doing that. The readers get tired of reading the same thing. But each character needs to have their own flaws. They need to have their own struggles and conflicts, and so just make sure you do that. And they need to be. You can have some that are connected, and they need to have their own too. So go ahead.
So if you spend like 15 books developing a character and like deep diving, you've got your Pinterest boards and they've got their orange soda and their inside jokes.
Yeah.
How do you disentangle and like clean the mental palette before you create new characters so that they're really distinct?
Right. For me, and this is one of the things I don't know how to explain, It's hard to explain what I do. I have a billion characters in my head at one time. I probably have 20 whips going at one time. Not actively writing on them, but I do have 3 that I'm actively writing on. And I just think about, hey, am I doing the same thing I did in the other one? Don't do that. Do something different. I mean, make sure you know your characters. Make sure they're personal friends to you. Make sure you know their ins and outs, and you know more about them than even the reader does. Even when the series is done, there are more things. I know more things about my Fairy Queen than my readers do, and so you need to make sure they're personal friends of yours, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if you've done your research and you've developed the character enough, it's not an issue.
It shouldn't be, no. Now, I mean, if you start to see some crossover, and sometimes I do, I see something, okay, well this is doing this the same way as another character. That doesn't mean it's bad, because people do the same thing the same way, whatever, depending on, but if you're focusing on what their motivation is and what their flaws are, and that the motivation and those flaws are different from what the other character is, then you're probably going to end up with a completely different character. And you should, because they're, they've got different things going on in their lives and different conflicts that, interact with them. So it's amazing when have you done more than one? No, just it's amazing when you start to write a different one. You'll see that the characters are very vivid in your mind as the different people that they are.
Thank you.
We've got a question from online.
Oh, okay.
This is from Catherine. There's been a movement toward older characters in romance. Do you think there is a need/interest for main characters that aren't the sassy 20-somethings in urban fantasy?
Well, I think the people that have done paranormal women's fiction have proven that that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Those books have been very, very popular, and it's an extension of urban fantasy, and they do have a little bit of a more romantic element to them, but they're still urban fantasy based because they're all about the story and not as much about the romance. This person's been put into conflict. They've just been put in the conflict in the middle of their life as opposed to early on in their life. And I think that does appeal because I know my readers, if I do a demographics, most of them are, 30 or above. So reading about people that's 30 and above is very, very important to them. That I've had people say, hey, I get tired of reading about all these young folks running around in their skin-tight pants and their crop tops and, I want to see a real person. And what they're saying is they want to see someone like them. And a lot of times that does have to do with age and experience and where they are in their life story. And so I think that's important. I think it's been very successful for the people that's done paranormal women's fiction. It's recognized as a genre now. They blew into the market and it's taken off them. So I think that's very important that you have those diverse stories. And I think that applies to everything. You're seeing more and more LGBTQ stories. You're seeing more, and urban fantasy's kind of always been female-led, but you see more male stories. You're seeing more ethnic stories of different races. You're seeing more and more stories about, besides you're just based of North and Greek gods, you're seeing more Native American, you're seeing more Asian. And so these are markets that are starting to build up, and those are things that you should look into when you're building the story. What can I hit that somebody hasn't hit yet? And when those ladies did the paranormal women's fiction, they hit something that there were stories out there, but they weren't really completely defined by, hey, that's what this is. And so that has to do with when you're building your characters and building your story, where does your story fit into all of that? So find out, where that niche is and get into it. I write Southern urban fantasy. Everything I write takes place in the South. That's where mine is. And so find that little bit of part. It's still urban fantasy, and a lot of it happens in a small town, but it's still urban fantasy because it's modern day, and they have, cars and electric lights and running water, believe it or not, in rural Alabama. I know, right? And so, I have my quintessential Southern characters. There's 2 guys there that are Cletus and Tater, and they fight the Fae battles with potato guns, even though they're completely human. So, find that place where your characters belong, and if it's a new place, don't be scared to go there. I was kind of worried, there's not a whole lot of Southern-based urban fantasy out there. There's a few, and everybody brings up True Blood or, that kind of thing. And Louisiana is very different than Alabama, just saying. But, you know, that find that place where you belong as a person and your characters belong.
Is a possible way to kind of mitigate some of these things, would it be interesting to start a character at 20 and then through your series age them through their life? Because at that point, there are going to be different things that happen in their life. At 20, you can have a story arc that goes over maybe three or four books in a series, but once they hit 40 and, you know, you have children, or maybe, you know, there's grandchildren, menopause, you know, certain performance issues, you know, other things.
That's interesting. I don't think it's interesting. It's interesting.
I mean, how do you work honey through this? You know, you can do all kinds of stuff. I think, because one of the things that I wonder about is that sometimes, and I think we've all seen this, some people will say that your series is kind of telling the same story over and over again. And I think somebody mentioned it earlier, it's like you're doing the same story over and over again.
Right.
Possibly aging, is aging characters up, is that trickier, or is that?
I don't think it is. I just think that, you know, you have to decide, you know, at what point you want to start and stop your characters. At what point. And when I go to write a book, honestly, this is the way I think about it. When I started fairy tales for trailer parking, I thought about, okay, I want to have, you know, how do I mix fairies with trailer parks? And why in the world would a fairy queen be living in a trailer park? And that's where Grace came. And what I wanted to take her from was a situation where she was always running and never had a home. And she never felt at home anywhere because she was always running. She wasn't supposed to be in the human world. There's people who hunt fairies in the human world and they want to kill them because they don't belong there, because they cause trouble. I mean, honestly. And, you know, and she's, you know, lived for 100 years on Earth, but she's managed to move constantly. And when she gets to this town and she makes the deal with the hunters that if she stays here and behaves, that she can stay there. And when things start to get tough, she has it constantly going through her head of, I need to run, I want to run. And then I have to decide the whys. Why does she want to stay? What are the reasons? Why would she say for the little girl that lives across the street whose mother's a prostitute and she takes care of her while her mother turns tricks? You know, so you have to ask why over and over again. I mentioned that. And so if your character's starting out at 20, you know, and they go through that progression and they say, okay, they're going to be in their 40s now. Why do I want to move them there? And when you answer those questions, and if they fall out, then it's absolutely okay to progress. And it makes you have a really long series, a really interesting series. And you were talking about, you know, building new flaws. And like I said, flaws come as a person goes, and as they age, absolutely. Those physical flaws definitely come in. Things start to hurt that didn't hurt before. You know, you can't see as well as you used to be able to see. And so that may affect your character in the physical flaw area. Back to that.
Sorry, so hitting on kind of both comments that were brought up, with the merchandising and also with, like you said, your books in the town, pretty much probably where you live. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like readers want to see the real town or a fictional town that represents your town? Because I struggle with both. Like, I write a lot of mine in my hometown, so I live in the South as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I find myself making up this fictional town that's literally the same town.
Right.
I don't know which one is more marketable, you know?
I don't think it matters because I created Shady Grove where they live as a fictional place, but there is a Shady Grove, Alabama, and I had to find it. It's like, whoops. And it's not near, actually, my little small town of Shady Grove is bigger than the actual Shady Grove. So I think the actual Shady Grove has a church and a gas station, and that's it. So, you know, it's okay to have that. But then, like, the Roll-Off series is kind of based in Mobile, Alabama, along the coast. And I didn't want to use Mobile because most people look at Mobile, the name, and say mobile, because it's spelled mobile. And I didn't want to confuse my readers, and I didn't want to do that, so I renamed it, and I call it Still Shore, but it's still Mobile. And so Still Shore goes along with, that's the Phoenix series, and then I have the Werewolf series, and they're in Dog River, which Dog River is a real place in Alabama. So I don't think it matters. I think sometimes when you do real places, people are going to constantly go, oh, you did this place wrong, but this isn't where you said it was. And so to avoid that sometimes, use the city you want to use, but rename it. You know, and that'll help you say, you know, well, my city's different than that. It's not the actual same one. But don't be afraid. If it's somewhere you know, I have a series coming up next year that takes place in Birmingham. I live 20 minutes outside of Birmingham, and I've been in it all my life. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, but Birmingham, they're adjacent. So, you know, when I write this series about Birmingham, I'm going to use actual places and things in Birmingham because I know it. And I dare you to contradict me on it, you know, because that's almost hometown for me. So it's okay to use either one. Just be careful when you use real ones to make sure they're accurate because they will call you up. There's a bunch of gotcha readers out there. There's some nice. All right. Do I got anything else?